Greetings, brothers and sisters. So I actually want to move on. I got some funny celebrity stuff to get to. I got a whole thing to do about Kanye and but Joe Biden, JoJo Magoo gave he has these two different personalities. This weak, lost, soft-spoken, clueless, low energy Joe Biden, JoJo Magoo. And then he has the get off my lawn where he's fired up and he just yells. And he usually in press conferences, he's the sort of low energy Magoo, but every once in a while he gets angry and he gives one of these forceful lines, right? Your testosterone levels go down as you get older. But he gave this press conference yesterday, and I just, I was like, I don't know if I want to cover it or not. And I was playing it in the background. I was answering comments and, hearting comments, not answering them, doing some other things. And I could hear him, and it was like some guy, just get off my lawn, right? He's yelling, and he said some things that just need to be addressed here. So I'm going to cover the whole thing. I mean, it seemed like he was, he came out with an attitude. He came out, hot, and they've already backed off some of his claims. White House corrects Biden's claim 90% of Americans out of Afghanistan. And so they've already had to walk back part of his barking. So let me get into that. But speaking of barking, I wanted to do an update on these animals, these pets and service dogs in Afghanistan. Not a great day for American service dogs. U.S. military abandoned dozens of dogs alongside planes, Chinooks, and Humvees worth billions and scrambled to leave Kabul. American Humane, I think that's American Humane Society, said working dogs will likely face torture by the Taliban, condemned the death sentence. The organization called Congress to load the dogs onto available cargo space for evacuation from Kabul. According to the SPCA, 46 working dogs and others that were pets to Americans in Kabul may have been left behind. The Pentagon's press secretary, John Kirby, saying they were in the care of Animal Rescue Charity. Kabul's small animal rescue charity had petitioned the U.S. military to evacuate the dogs. And so dozens of dogs, it says here, and civilians were abandoned. And we already know that. And so one thing I want to add, this picture here, this idea that these dogs were left on the tarmac, to correct erroneous reports, U.S. military did not leave any dogs in cages at the Hamad Karzai International Airport, including the reported military working dogs. Photos circulate online were animals under the care of Kabul Small Animal Rescue, not dogs under our care. Now, there's two things here. Number one, at least they didn't leave dogs on the tarmac, because that would be brutal, right? So hot there or whatever. I mean, just, this is a horrible image to show that there'd be dogs in cages and they just left them there on the airport tarmac. So at least this is, it's a hard image to look at if you're animal lover. But he's also confirming that they left animals and that they're working with a small animal rescue in Kabul. So it's giving some legitimacy because people are worried that this is a scam. And I'm going to tell you why, it easily could be. But they just look at all these flap jackets and all this military equipment they just dumped there. There's the small animal rescue with that woman, Charlotte Maxwell Jones. So now the mainstream media is using that statement by the military to sort of try to debunk the idea that service dogs got left behind. Pentagon criticizes viral reports that U.S. left service dogs in Afghanistan. So here's a statement I read to you from the other article, and these various news publications are using this statement to claim that there were no dogs left behind, right? And that's not what the statement says. American Humane Group says U.S. left military dogs behind in Afghanistan. Whether they left them at the airport or not is what they're saying. Like that, they can be factual. We didn't leave any at the airport. Well, did you leave some behind? And what are you doing to bring them back? Because, they are soldiers, right? The American military would say those dogs are a part of the team, maybe even saved lives and things like this, right? And so, that's, say the same thing with police dogs. And the soldiers get attached to them, right? There's camaraderie there. So that's completely effed up that they're trying to deny. Well, those cages weren't ours. Okay, well, did you leave dogs? No comment at this time, right? So Pentagon debunks reports claiming U.S. abandoned dozens of military service dogs in Kabul. And so Yahoo News is really bad at this. They give these deceptive headlines because it doesn't say that they denied leaving dogs, just not at the airport. That's this statement right here, which I already read to you. The U.S. priority mission was the evacuation of U.S. citizens, SIV, and vulnerable Afghans. However, to correct erroneous reports, the U.S. military did not leave any dogs in cages at the Hamid Karzai International Airport. Well, that was because those photos were circulating of the dogs in cages at the airport. But did they leave service dogs behind? Because multiple sources said they did. And so this doesn't dispute it. In fact, they're basically saying that they didn't leave them at airports, but they, left them somewhere. So the Kabul Small Animal Rescue. Charlotte here. I want to apologize for the quiet social media. We are busy making plans, checking them twice, sorting out details, and keeping things quiet to maintain our own and the animal's security. We know it's not the most satisfying feed to follow, but please know that behind the scenes we are busting our tails to do everything we can to save our furry friends, and we deeply appreciate everyone's continued concern and support. Then there are some tweets here. We know not having a lot of information is scary, and we know that fear leads to speculation, Operation Hercules. But right now, please let the process work. Calm and clear is critical. There are a lot of things circulating right now that are true, false, or outdated. It's been a busy day, stressful day. We see them and are choosing not to comment. We explain everything soon while we work this evacuation effort. One more time for the folks in the back, stop tweeting CENTCOM and Department of State. We are working on our contacts. Please stop tweeting at CENTCOM, State Department, others. We have an incredible team working hard right now and focusing where we need it. Thank you. So the issue here is that it is they're looking to raise now $1 million. It was $800,000, and so this is their GoFundMe page. And there's this other rescue organization that was there. I guess they had a plane there. So this guy put out a video on August 30th here.
That's not enough. I know that it's meager, but it's what I've got. The second thing is that Charlotte has chosen to remain in Kabul. She refused to give up a rescue puppy that was in her possession, directly physically in her hands. She's no longer at the airport. She is back in the city. She is safe right now. And that is what it is. I don't have much to say there past other that was the decision she made, and she has passion. I do, and I wrote this out to make sure I had it right, I do want to thank organizations behind the scenes that have not gotten enough respect and enough press, and that's my dog. The puppy rescue mission, first and foremost, behind the scenes, just doing everything they could, just hero stuff. War Paws, exact same thing. Every single opportunity that they could, they went after it. The SPCA International did so much and worked so hard for these dogs, just incredible, around the clock there as well. All three of those organizations, just insane. The Humane Society, I mean, of course, the Humane Society is everywhere. The H3 Foundation, and then finally our 11th minute gave us a chance in the Veteran Sheepdogs of America. Josh, again, veteran to veteran brother, thank you so much for even...
The Veteran Sheepdogs of America to fly whatever, I don't know if it was one plane or multiple planes out there. They said it cost, like $1.3 or $1.6 million. And so people are, wondering if this is a scam. I mean, it seems like extravagant amount of money to bring these, dogs and pets home. And so it also speaks to, not bringing pets to war because it's, how expensive it is and what the hassle is, and you have this choice of coming home without your pet or staying there with it, So, I mean, pets don't belong in a wartime situation. And I don't know if some of these, soldiers, and maybe they're young people, right? They're usually young people. Young soldiers take pets in, street dogs or, something, they find a cat or whatever. While they're in Afghanistan, they want to make some sort of, normal situation there, right? And they're there for a couple of years, and then they have to come home, and the military's like, hey, you're not taking that dog with you. I mean, it just, it speaks to just the nightmare of the situation there and just being in the military in general. And war is hell, right? You'd like to see all these pets come home, but think about that amount of money being spent on all the, the various animals, abandoned animals in America. It would go a lot farther if you're talking about $2-3 million of money that's being raised for these animals there, which, I can understand why people want to bring them home, especially the service dogs, which seems like sort of an atrocity. And so this whole thing is kind of a mess. I'll continue to look into this, and we'll, update when something happens one way or another here. But this is just, really bad publicity for Biden and the military. So I'm in the editing process of this video, and one of my viewers sent me this, which I, need to include. This video is really long. I didn't know it was so long. But 24 California students and their families stranded in Afghanistan, and that's not good, right? Families were asking for the U.S. government help after being unable to board their flights back to California. Multiple families from a San Diego suburb with a large refugee population are among those stuck in Afghanistan after going back to the country over the summer break to visit grandparents and other relatives. And so there's whole families of Afghanistan Americans, American citizens that have Afghanistan roots, ancestry, who are stuck in Afghanistan, and Americans didn't get them out, right? JoJo Magoo didn't get them out. And so it seems like, there's a whole group of people that knew each other, and so the government knew about them but gave them the runaround. We knew that before. We've heard that from other people, that the government was giving people the runaround, show up here, and that other woman who's Afghani, but she's an American citizen, and she talked to Chris Cuomo's, and they gave her the runaround. And so I just want to throw that in here because when you hear JoJo Magoo shouting his speech, right, he's very aggressive in his speech. He's, not telling the truth. I also wanted to say there's a great definition given in the heartfulness system of a way of looking at morality. And Master Charji, the third master of the heartfulness system, said that morality is the proper utilization of resources. And I think I have the quote somewhere. Hopefully I can find it. But it's a great way to look at morality, right? The proper utilization of resources. Because, when you live in a desire-based society, we have instead of, it's based in wants and not needs. And resources are wasted. That, especially in America, we waste so much fresh water. Fresh water, drinking water in our toilets, for example. People in the desert watering their lawns so they can have a little green grass, like back home where they came from in the East Coast or, some other part of America. But then they move out west where it's the desert, but they want some grass on their lawn, right? Things like that. And so this is a very immoral war because of the, waste of resources, right? You really can't justify $2.3 trillion worth of money and resources being dumped into this war, to say nothing of lives and the lives ruined by Afghan people that are, going to suffer now more than before, and, all of it, right? And so this is, by very definition, an immoral war. So here comes JoJo Magoo, and he's got his mask on. This is what he does, right? And so where was he that he had his mask on? Was he with a bunch of people here? Did he really have his mask on? Or did he put it on? We've seen this before, where these politicians put their mask on, then walk out as a show, and then do this, right? And so, it's insincere. Like, he's coming up with this speech here about this immoral war that he was a part of, and I've showed you the clips of him saying that we need regime change in Afghanistan, saying that they had to get rid of the Taliban. It was the only way we were going to be safe. He said it in 2001 and then again in 2008 and probably multiple times in between. And so, he wanted to refocus in 2008. I showed you that clip with Katie Couric the other day. And then this thing with ISIS-K and all of it, sort of for him to save face. And so just coming out and being insincere as he's going to yell at everybody.
Last night in Kabul, the United States ended 20 years of war in Afghanistan, the longest war in American history. We completed one of the biggest airlifts in history, with more than 120,000 people evacuated to safety. That number is more than double what most experts thought were possible.
He's got some sort of, it sounds like he's having denture issues with his speech. And that seems odd because he's always, he doesn't always talk the same way. But this part of the again, I heard this in the background. I didn't specifically sit there and watch it, but I could hear him, getting aggressive. But now he's in the bragging phase. Like, he's going to brag about what a great job they did and how they finally ended this war. The only problem is he could have ended the war as a vice president or, he ran on his vice presidency and how Obama was such a better president than Trump. So this is part of his, political life, his connection to Obama. I mean, that's one of the reasons he was picked, because Obama had a lot of, love and support in the Democratic community. And he used that, he leveraged that to, become the nominee and all these things. And so under that administration, they were supposed to get out of Afghanistan in 2014. He had said in a vice presidential debate, I showed you that clip, that they needed to get out and they were going to get out, period, in 2014. And that was 6 years ago. And they failed to do so. And he was an advocate of this war from the beginning and multiple times since. And now he's changed his tune. And he's self-righteous about it, like he was against it all along, right? Like he wasn't a part of this mess from the beginning.
No nation has ever done anything like it in all of history. Only the United States had the capacity and the will and ability to do it, and we did it today.
It was a mistake to go in there, and it was a failure. It was a lost war. There's nothing great here. Moving people and some of the equipment back, but losing billions of dollars of equipment, this isn't a day of celebration or something to be proud of. It's an embarrassment, especially when people and dogs were left behind.
The extraordinary success of this mission was due to the incredible skill, bravery, and selfless courage of the United States military and our diplomats and intelligence professionals. For weeks, they risked their lives to get American citizens, Afghans who helped us, citizens of our allies and partners and others on board planes and out of the country. And they did it facing a crush of enormous crowds seeking to leave the country. And they...
I'm not... the military soldiers are never to be blamed, right? Because their rights are gone. Like when you have a situation where you go into the military, you lose a lot of your rights and ability to choose things. So they're not to be blamed here. But it was, this isn't a victory march, right?
They did it knowing ISIS-K terrorists, sworn enemies of the Taliban, were lurking in the midst of those crowds.
So I'm going to come back to ISIS-K later because he is going to blame Trump for something. But remember him saying this, that he's, making this, when they introduce like a horror villain, like a Freddy Krueger or Jaws or, from the movie Jaws or Mike Myers from Halloween or, somebody like that, into the mix like they're a formidable enemy that is on a level of the American military. And I'm going to come back to this because this is a completely contrived aspect to this story.
And still, the women and men of the United States military, our diplomatic corps, and intelligence professionals did their job and did it well.
What?
Risking their lives, not for professional gains, but to serve others. Not in a mission of war, but in a mission of mercy.
They had no choice, right? If you don't, you're court-martialed for insubordination or desertion or whatever it might be. It's not like you can just quit and hop a commercial plane home to America, right? You're stuck there. And unless you go insane or you're injured or something, you got to just knuckle under and just do what you're told, even if you don't believe in what you're doing. And oftentimes, this happened with Pat Tillman, and you get there and you realize that the commanders don't have a handle what's going on. This often happens, the military brass and the politicians. In the beginning, the war is strategic. It's all about the strategy and the military strategy. But then the war becomes political. See, now it's political. And so soldiers have to endure things that are not correct. Like they know this is BS. Why are we doing this, right? This happened throughout the Vietnam War. You talk to war veterans, and they're staying there, and they have to do things that are going to help the political view. It's no longer about military victory or anything like that, right? It's simply political. And this move here is political, right? And so it's politics, and a lot of what's going on is politics. And soldiers have to endure things that makes no sense for political reasons. And so, they talk about it like they care about soldiers, but they put all these people in this position. Everybody who was in Afghanistan that is now fleeing the country and, outlasted by the Taliban and, whoever else they're making up here, right? And leaving behind, there's no energy when you're retreating, right? Just want to get out of there. Like there's a lot of energy when you start something. You get into a relationship, you start a business, right? Whatever it might be. Let's say you start a business and you're enthusiastic and you're really into it and there's money and there's people and energy in it. And then the business tanks and you're avoiding the creditors and you're going chapter 11, whatever it is, and you're just trying to get out of it and forget about, leave it behind, right? And not come out with any long lasting scars and things that will continue to plague you. And it's much worse when you invade a country and it's a wrongful invasion where you're subjugating the people. This happens with the colonialism model all the time. It happened with, like, say, the British in India, even though they're still connected to India in some ways. It's still part of the British Commonwealth. But when a superior military force invades a country and then just has to leave, it's always like this because it's wrong, right? It's an embarrassment because when a superior military force goes to a country, they always try to make it sound like they're helping the people in the country, right? That the people in the country want them to be there, and if they leave, there'll be some sort of danger, and they're protecting the people or whatever it might be. But what they're really doing is exploiting the people and their resources, and they don't have any long-term commitment. But they tell the people there, they get some collaborators on board who want to, benefit from being connected to a greater country, a wealthier country, and want some significance and importance. And they are promised things. These people are promised, to be supported by the military. And, this can be the same thing with billionaires. This happened with Trump, right? Trump did this to people. People would be like, he's a billionaire. He's going to, somehow benefit me. But Trump likes to win. Like, billionaires like their money. They like to win deals. They don't like to give things away. They're not the Wizard of Oz. America isn't the Wizard of Oz. America is a selfish country. It's about self-interest. And so they go into these countries and make promises they're never going to keep to the people. Many of the people from the beginning want the occupying force out of there, right? They just want you to leave. And so, America hasn't been through this, but we will. It's going to, eventually flip around where America isn't going to be powerful anymore. And I'll talk about that probably later in this video. And Americans will experience this when a foreign country occupies you, and then they go to leave, and all their promises are broken. And the truth of it, the selfishness, it's just like a divorce. Bad things about people come out in divorce, right? When a relationship ends, you see sort of the lower nature of people. Or, when business partnerships break up or friendships break up. And so this is what's happened in Afghanistan. And so for him to come out here and bark at everybody like he's somehow a hero and they've done a great job here, is just an absolute joke.
20 service members were wounded in the service of this mission. 13 heroes gave their lives. I was just at Dover Air Force Base for the dignified transfer. We owe them and their families a debt of gratitude we can never repay, but we should.
So, Wynn, you're yelling at us because we're somehow on the hook for this? Not you who voted and promoted this war? You owe them a debt, right? You owe them a debt, MNFer, right? Are you going to make good on it? Because
should never, ever, ever forget. In April, I made a decision to end this war. As part of that decision,
this tough guy routine, right? Just brutal. He made a decision. He's a decider. He's undecided. He makes decisions.
We set the date of August 31st for American troops to withdraw. The assumption was that more than 300,000 Afghan national security forces that we had trained over the past 2 decades and equipped would be a strong adversary in their civil wars with the Taliban.
These guys. This guy particularly. This guy was getting it done. This guy, when you see this guy, you have full confidence in their ability to fight off the Taliban. That guy particularly, he's getting it done. This is, look at these guys go. They're doing it. There's absolutely no doubt in their capacity to fight off the Taliban, especially this guy with his foot here, doing the extra, like, a little thing, boom, yeah. These guys, yeah. I can see why you had full confidence in this. I can see why you're yelling, like, somehow. Who are you yelling at? Like, let's go back and listen to that.
The assumption was that more than 300,000 Afghan national security forces that we had trained over the past 2 decades and equipped would be a strong adversary in their civil wars with the Taliban. That assumption that the Afghan government would be able to hold on for a period of time beyond military drawdown turned out not to be accurate.
So you were wrong. And anybody, who knew anything about this, all the soldiers knew they were going to fold because they weren't fighting a revolution. This is a very important aspect to this whole story, that the Afghan people weren't fighting a revolution against the Taliban. It's a very tribal area, and they have, learned to live with a lot of things that go on there, and they weren't looking to change them. And America went in and said, okay, you guys are going to have a democracy. And, they were like, all right, whatever. It's just what they do there. They have they've been invaded by people for a number of years, Russia recently, but, going back all the way to Alexander the Great, they have a lot of tribal wars, a lot of, disputes between, regions. It's not a place where it's you can think of it as a cohesive country. when you go to, like, say, India, I know India more specifically having been there, but they speak so many different languages, some like 500 different languages. They have these different states where in America, everybody speaks English. But in India, you go to areas, like if you're an Indian person, you go to other areas in the country and they speak completely different languages, have different customs, have different, aspects to their religion. And there are different looking, right? I mean, in America, you have the different dialects. You have a Southern accent and Midwest accent and Northeast accent and, all these different, and it changes from city to city. A Boston accent, California, whatever it is, right? And it's different in different places, but at least everybody speaks the same language. But that's not the case in these countries, and so it's a very divisive country. It's hard to have a unified government, and it was never going to hold. It was a failure of the United States. It's like the government that we created, and our puppet government failed when we left. Yeah, you're the puppeteer. You're the puppeteer, Ebedeffer, but he's puppeted too, right? Like, he's a puppet. He's being propped up. And so, you can't trust a puppet, right? Like, someone's got his hand up his, you know what, right? And that's who you got to look to. This is a confused puppet right here.
But I still instructed our national security team to prepare for every eventuality, even that one. And that's what we did.
No, you didn't. You didn't. You said that we weren't prepared for this. He literally said in other speeches we weren't ready for this. Who could have thought this would happen, right? They've said this over and over again. With all the spying and the NSA and the, all the things that they do, all the control they try to exhibit, America, but governments in general, but America specifically, like all this control and spying and intelligence, and they didn't figure that these guys who couldn't do jumping jacks and weren't really into it from the beginning and didn't have money and weren't being supported by a government that was created by a invading force would collapse when it was already collapsing.
So we were ready when the Afghan security forces, after 2 decades of fighting for their country and losing thousands of their own, did not hold on as long as anyone expected.
You were ready, but you had contingencies just in case. But we didn't know that was going to happen. It wasn't expected, but we had plans. Come on, bro. You're just, you're drowning in your own imbecilic lies here.
We were ready when they and the people of Afghanistan watched their own government collapse and the president flee amid the corruption and malfeasance, handing over the country to their enemy, the Taliban.
Not their enemy, your enemy. They weren't, they didn't have a revolution beforehand.
And significantly increasing the risk to U.S. personnel and our allies. As a result, to safely extract American citizens before August 31st, as well as embassy personnel, allies and partners, and those Afghans who had worked with us and fought alongside of us for 20 years.
What about service dogs?
I had authorized 6,000 troops, American troops, to Kabul to help secure the airport. As General McKenzie said, this is the way the mission was designed. It was designed to operate under severe stress and attack, and that's what it did.
Get off my lawn, right? He's all fired up here. Who are you yelling at? Like, you're yelling at the critics or haters for your failure? Like, who are you yelling at? Like, what are you mad about? Like, this is the barking JoJo Magoo.
Since March,
he's going to challenge somebody to a push-up contest anytime now.
We reached out 19 times to Americans in Afghanistan with multiple warnings and offers to help them leave Afghanistan, all the way back as far as March.
So I'm just editing this in, but at the time that I made this, I did not know there was 24 American citizen family members, kids, and people from a community in California who were desperately trying to get out. And they were just there to visit relatives. They're not political. They're not connected to the American government or the military. They're there just to visit family, and they were trying to get out, and they didn't get him out, right? So anything he's saying here is not true, right? He's trying to make himself and his policies, and this is where it becomes political. It's not truth, it's political. It's not about America or the military. It's about appearances. How can we spin this? How can we make this look good? And so this is where politics gets so greasy. That's why I say avoid politics. The only real way to change the world is to change yourself, become a better person, and raise your vibrational frequency and, become a more loving person. Because power doesn't change things. People think, oh, if I have power, I can change things. No, right? Change things internally. You can change things on an internal level in your own sphere, and then that'll affect other people.
That's what it did. Since March, we reached out 19 times to Americans in Afghanistan with multiple warnings and offers to help them leave Afghanistan, all the way back as far as March.
Wait, is it March? I don't know. I'm sure it was March. Let's say it one more time. Look how confused he is, even though he's yelling.
After we started the evacuation 17 days ago, we did initial outreach and analysis and identified around 5,000 Americans who had decided earlier to stay in Afghanistan, but now wanted to leave. Our Operation Allied Rescue ended up getting more than 5,500 Americans out. We got out thousands of citizens and diplomats from those countries that went into Afghanistan with us to get bin Laden. We got out locally employed staff of the United States Embassy and their families, totaling roughly 2,500 people. We got thousands of Afghan translators and interpreters and others who supported the United States out as well.
Well, you did an incredible job. I'm changing my mind now. Look at what you did there. This is the kind of stuff they used to rail against Trump about. When Trump was being criticized and he came out, he talked about how great he was doing. And they would say, hey, look at this guy. He won't accept it. This is, everything that they hated about Trump. Like, there's no person who hated Trump and voted for Joe Biden that should say anything about anything anymore. Because he is Trump. Like, he is, when he gets criticized, he comes out and brags. He does exactly what, they used to hate about Trump. And it's the same behavior. I've talked about this before. If you're against a behavior, if you're saying, hey, when somebody does this behavior, it is unpresidential and wrong, and then your guy does the behavior and you excuse it, then you're a fraud. Like, you're a complete, I mean, you just have to, understand it isn't about your side and somebody else's side. In any sort of accountability system, the same behavior, if the behavior is bad, should get the same sort of criticism and consequences.
Now we believe that about 100 to 200 Americans remain in Afghanistan.
You don't know.
With some intention to leave.
You don't know.
Most of those who remain are dual citizens, long-time residents who had earlier decided to stay because of their family roots in Afghanistan.
But you don't even know how many there are. How do you know what their orientation is, right?
Bottom line, 90% of Americans in Afghanistan who wanted to leave were able to leave.
Yeah, but that bottom line, we already showed this. See, if you're saying you're not sure, right? Like, you don't know how many Americans. Maybe one, maybe two, we don't know, right? We're trying to contact people, some people we're not in contact with. We're not sure. Like, they're not sure of a lot of things, but he's talking with a lot of confidence for a guy who's bumbled his way through this whole operation. And, because he isn't up for the task, right? He never was. He never was. He never was presidential. He was never presidential material. He showed that when he plagiarized himself when he ran for president the first time. He showed it by being a gaffe magnet, a snoozler, a groper, a sniffer of women and kids, a weird dude, right? He was a bumbling idiot as vice president. CNN did a hit piece on him to keep him from running against Hillary Clinton, a gaffe magnet, a guy who lied all the time, braggadocious. I mean, he was just, he was never somebody they'd consider a president. He was just a lifelong politician. And somehow, because of Trump and a lack of quality candidates and, no one really maybe wanted to be a president this time because whoever was president was going to have to deal with all these crises. We're not even going to get into the inflation and the economic crisis yet. That hasn't even hit, right? We're just talking about immigration in Afghanistan right now. Wait till this affects everyday Americans when they're, the value of the dollar plummets and all the rest of it. So no one really wanted to be this guy. Even Trump, Trump wanted to win, but whoever was the president during this 4 years was going to take a beating. So they put this, old fool out there, right, to take a beating. And maybe they thought they could convince people that Kamala would be a good replacement, but now that's, that's failing.
And for those remaining Americans, there is no deadline. We remain committed to get them out if they want to come out. Secretary of State Blinken is leading the continued diplomatic efforts to ensure safe passage for any American, Afghan partner, or foreign national who wants to leave Afghanistan. In fact, just yesterday, the United Nations Security Council passed a resolution that sent a clear message about what the international community expects the Taliban to deliver on moving forward, notably freedom of travel, freedom to leave.
Freedom to leave.
And together, we are joined by over 100 countries that are determined to make sure the Taliban upholds those commitments.
And not one of those countries wants any part of an Afghanistan war in the future. Let's be real here. I mean, it's just economic pressure is all you have. International pressure. If the Taliban want to be recognized as a legitimate government and want to get, whatever, some sort of, it's basically bribing them and giving them something, food, money, whatever, medicines, whatever it might be, so that they will cooperate. So this is just, and it's going to be America more than anybody else because it's Americans, right? And, as soon as they end this thing, they want to leave it in the rearview mirror. They don't want to talk about Afghanistan next, in October or the end of September. They want this thing to dissipate. They want something else to happen that takes the focus off of this, and they want to get back to talking about COVID and other things, right? Of course, the fall's coming up, and, this kind of COVID does, better in terms of the disease. More people get it during the winter months, right? Just like the flu. And so this is, they want to sweep this thing under the rug and move on. Like he's talking like they have a commitment here, but they don't, right? They don't want to hear about Afghanistan. They don't want Afghanistan being in the news. They want to move on to something else.
It will include ongoing efforts in Afghanistan to reopen the airport, as well as overland routes, allowing for continued departure to those who want to leave and deliver humanitarian assistance to the people of Afghanistan. The Taliban has made public commitments, broadcast on television and radio across Afghanistan, on safe passage for anyone wanting to leave, including those who worked alongside Americans. We don't take them by their word alone.
Yeah, you don't? Why'd you talk about it?
By their actions.
By their actions.
We have leverage
He believes in actions.
to make sure those commitments are met. Let me be clear. Leaving August the 31st is not due to an arbitrary deadline. It was designed to save American lives. My predecessor, the former president.
So he talked about how great he did. This is a part that I was listening to in the background. And now he's going to talk about how badly Trump failed, right? And the poor situation he was put in. But they made, lemonade out of lemons, which didn't happen, right? Like he's trying to blame Trump and take credit at the same time. And how long is this going to go on? Like, how long are you going to blame Trump for everything, right? And nobody's really buying it. Trump isn't even being covered by the mainstream media again. They're kind of, they've moved on, even though they've been obsessed with him for years, and he was their winning ticket. Their ratings are down, right? People are tired of hearing about Trump, and, you're doing a victory speech. This is Trump-esque.
The president signed an agreement with the Taliban to remove U.S. troops by May the 1st, just months after I was inaugurated. It included no requirement that the Taliban work out a cooperative government arrangement with the Afghan government. But it did authorize the release of 5,000 prisoners last year, including some of the Taliban's top war commanders, among those who just took control of Afghanistan. By the time I came to office, the Taliban was in its strongest military position since 2001, controlling or contesting nearly half of the country.
So why didn't you anticipate, and we can go back to where he was saying, I'm not going to go back because you can remember, we just heard it, but he just said that nobody thought that the Afghani troops, the jumping jack Afghani troops would fold, and yet he's saying now that Trump put the Taliban back into power by releasing prisoners of war who were Taliban commanders, and that the Taliban was in their strongest military position since America invaded. And so why wouldn't you think that this was an option? Like, you're just contradicting your own story here. It's like the worst possible in a very flagrant way. If Trump released all of these prisoners and he emboldened the Taliban, then wouldn't you think that there was a chance that the military that you created, a puppet military and a puppet government, would collapse when the real energy? It's just like Trump against Biden. Trump had so much energy. Bernie Sanders had so much energy. They could get 20,000 people at a rally. But this guy, he could barely get a handful. So they hid him behind COVID to pretend like he was popular and there was enthusiasm behind him. It's the same thing that happened with the Afghan situation, where the Taliban had enthusiasm. They had power, and the Afghan people, some of them, many of them, backed them. But the Afghan government and the Afghan military that was propped up by the U.S. had no spine because there was no energy there. The people weren't into it. And so, of course, they were going to collapse, and everybody knew it, right? I mean, there was all these people that said they knew this for years. There was a former colonel that came out when this debacle began. I showed you the clip, and he said he knew this was going to happen for years. And so, I'll see if I can find that clip again. It's in one of my videos. But he said he knew this was going to happen almost right off the bat. And so for him to say that they didn't anticipate it, and it's also Trump's fault, but they made, lemonade out of it, right? It's just that he's barking at you like you're, some stray dog on his lawn.
The previous administration's agreement said that if we stuck to the May 1st deadline that they had signed on to leave by, the Taliban wouldn't attack any American forces. But if we stayed, all bets were off. So we were left with a simple decision.
So you're saying that there was no attacks, right? That there was peace in Afghanistan because the Taliban were restrained from attacking Americans as they gained their strongholds because of Trump. Then why was there any threat for you, right? Why is there all of a sudden an ISIS-K? Why didn't ISIS-K attack Trump? So I'm going to come back to this in just a minute. I'm going to let him finish here. But think about this. He's saying that there was all this threat at the airport and the military stood up to it. The crush of people wanting to leave. But the Taliban have stood down and there was no ISIS-K. Why didn't Trump have an ISIS-K problem? Why did this ISIS-K wait till you were leaving? If they were about destabilization, why did they want Americans to stay? Did ISIS-K want to have Americans stay in Afghanistan? Because that's the only reason to attack when you're leaving, right? Why would ISIS-K wait till you're leaving? It doesn't make any sense, right? Did they, They want Americans out. They don't want Americans there. They don't want Americans occupying that area. So why would this organization that just appeared not bother Trump? And I'll come back to that in just a second. Let him finish here.
Either follow through on the commitment made by the last administration and leave Afghanistan, or say we weren't leaving and commit another tens of thousands more troops going back to war. That was the choice, the real choice.
That was the choice. Who's he yelling at? Like, well, who you mad at, bro? You angry, bro? What's up?
Choice between leaving or escalating. I was not going to extend this forever war, and I was not extending a forever exit. The decision to end the military airlift operations at Kabul airport was based on the unanimous recommendation of my civilian and military advisors.
That screwed up this war for 20 years. Like, let's not leave that part out, right? They're the ones who got us into this mess in the first place. You know, it wasn't, the rest of us. We were like, hey, let's go to Afghanistan. I mean, when this big event happened in 2001, no one thought, hey, let's go to Afghanistan. You guys said, hey, we got to go to Afghanistan, right? That's where this guy is, who was, also an American asset.
The Secretary of State, the Secretary of Defense, the Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, and all the service chiefs, and the commanders in the field. Their recommendation was that the safest way to secure the passage of the remaining Americans and others out of the country was not to continue with 6,000 troops on the ground in harm's way in Kabul, but rather to get them out through non-military means. In the 17 days that we operated in Kabul, after the Taliban seized power, we engaged in an around-the-clock effort to provide every American the opportunity to leave.
They tried to get everybody out.
Our State Department was working 24/7.
They didn't take an hour off, not 23 and 59 minutes, 24/7.
Contacting and talking, and in some cases walking, Americans into the airport.
But you couldn't find, you don't know whether it's 200, 100, or how many people are left, right? And there's pets and dogs and things.
Again, more than 5,500 Americans were airlifted out. And for those who remain, we will make arrangements to get them out if they so choose. As for the Afghans, we and our partners have airlifted 100,000 of them. No country in history has done more to airlift out the residents of another country than we have done.
Was this the goal, to bring back 100,000 Afghans? Was this the goal you guys started off with this war? To bring in immigrants from another country that may or may not have any skills or anything to add to America after dumping $2 trillion of war money into this, and lots of people walking away, Halliburton, Dick Cheney, lots of these politicians walking away with money. That was the goal, to bring in more immigrants when there's already a problem at the southern border. You've just had a crisis at the southern border, your immigrant crisis, which you dumped on Kamala, who didn't want even any part of it. And then you've brought in 100,000 more immigrants to compete with, Americans for jobs and things like this, because you launched a war that failed, right? So, yeah, many of these Afghans deserve something because you made promises to them on behalf of the American people. But it's not like you're, cutting into your son's crack money. You're not taking money from Hunter Biden. You're taking American taxpayer dollars and Americans who are struggling, and you're adding another, group of people who may or may not, have much to offer in terms of, job potential. Or if they do, they're taking jobs away from Americans. So, this isn't something to brag about, right? It's just another part of a large mistake.
We will continue to work to help more people leave the country who are at risk. We're far from done. For now, I urge all Americans to join me in grateful prayer for our troops and diplomats and intelligence officers who carried out this mission of mercy in Kabul.
It's not a mercy. It was a war that killed people and, didn't succeed and made something worse. How is this a merciful war? This was a revenge war. This was, something happened to America and you riled up the Americans and said, we need some payback. How many movies did we see where Americans get payback, right? If you do something to America, we're going to get you back. Eye for an eye. This isn't higher level consciousness. This isn't godly stuff. This isn't, wow, we're taking other people's resources all around the world and maybe they'd be mad at us. You've created circumstances where people aren't going to like Americans. And then you also create, these fictional events that happen. And then you want to, indulge the military-industrial complex because that's what our economy's predicated on, to create wars that should never happen. And then you want to pray about it? You want God to endorse and clean up this mess, this hell on earth that you've created in these countries, the suffering people in these countries at these illegal and immoral wars, immoral in the sense of the proper utilization of resources that I've said before. This is just, this is on you. This isn't a prayer.
And a tremendous risk with such unparalleled results. An airlift that evacuated tens of thousands, to a network of volunteers and veterans who helped identify those needing evacuation, guide them to the airport, and provided them for their support along the way. We're going to continue to need their help. We need your help, and I'm looking forward to meeting with you. And to everyone who is now offering or who will offer to welcome Afghan allies to their homes around the world, including in America, we thank you. I take responsibility for the decision.
He takes responsibility.
Now some say we should have started mass evacuation sooner.
Yeah, that's obvious now to everybody.
And couldn't this have been done in a more orderly manner?
Yeah, that too.
I respectfully disagree.
Yeah. Of course you do.
Imagine if we'd begun evacuations in June or July, bringing in thousands of American troops and evacuating more than 120,000 people in the middle of a civil war.
It was not a civil war. They did not fight back.
There still would have been a rush to the airport, a breakdown in confidence and control of the government, and it still would have been a very difficult and dangerous mission. The bottom line is there is no evacuation
No evacuation
from the end of a war that you can run without the kinds of complexities, challenges, and threats we faced. None. There are those who would say we should have stayed indefinitely for years on end. They ask, why don't we just keep doing what we were doing?
Nobody's really saying that. They're saying we could have left some troops, but no longer call it, a war. Like they leave military bases like, Guantanamo Bay in Cuba and South Korea and these various places. The demilitarized zone in South Korea, North Korea. And this has happened over and over again. American military bases in foreign countries.
Why do we have to change anything?
Which I'm not for, because the thing was a mess and America shouldn't have occupied any of these countries or whatever. But that's what American military does.
The fact is, everything had changed. My predecessor had made a deal with the Taliban. When I came into office, we faced a deadline, May 1.
Faced a deadline to May 1, and we missed that deadline because we were focused on other things. The problem for him is he could have started working on this in January. They could have more extensive lists, and they could have told people, you're going to need to get out. Like the Taliban are going to take over, because everyone knew it. They were amassing energy, and there was no, everyone knew the government was a joke there. Like, it wasn't a real government. And so,
One. The Taliban onslaught was coming. We faced one of two choices.
But, you didn't think they would fold.
Follow the agreement of the previous administration and extend to have more time for people to get out. Or send in thousands of more troops and escalate the war. To those asking for a third decade of war in Afghanistan, I ask.
Nobody wanted that. Nobody wanted that war in Afghanistan in the first frickin' place. I didn't hear one person say they wanted more war in Afghanistan. I don't know one American, given what's happened with COVID and everything else, that has any interest in spending more money there. Nobody's saying that. Like, nobody said that at all. Some people said that they wanted to leave some military there. That is whatever it is. I mean, it's a mistake. The mistake is, now it's leaving people behind and dogs and just not admitting you're part of it. Like, he was the person he was the senator in charge of the Committee on Foreign Relations. So he was a big war hawk too, even as a Democrat. And so he was on board with all these wars, and then the Arab Spring with Obama, and all these things failed. And you are, this was years of failed politics and, military planning and these things, the military-industrial complex, and he's all part of that too, right? This is a failure of that, the Clintons and the Bushes and all these, powerful families, and he's a part of that. Obama is extended in there. And it's, it should be the end of that, the end of that, those political threads, strains of political movements that has failed. Politicians who have, run this country into the ground. And now he's in charge of this thing. He's in charge of the dismantling of the American empire and the going out of business sale that we see, the looting of America and the currency being inflated.
Ask, what is the vital national interest? In my view, we only have one. To make sure Afghanistan can never be used again to launch an attack on our homeland.
And you just showed that by having these events by, ISIS-K emerging. So, like, that failed. Like, you by bringing that into the equation, you've even, crapped on yourself there.
Remember why we went to Afghanistan in the first place? Because we were attacked by Osama bin Laden and al-Qaeda on September 11th, 2001. And they were based in Afghanistan.
That's what you told us, right? That was the story you guys told us. But they ended up going to Pakistan. And, and we know how that all played out. And it seemed very sketchy. I mean, not believable. And so, why bring something up like this when, what we were told us was the Taliban was friendly to these big actors. And as long as the Taliban were in power, America was in jeopardy. And now you've given the Taliban more power, more weapons, and a seat at the table internationally, where now you are, beholding to them to allow their citizens and Americans to get out of the country. And so you're going to be working with this government that you sought to. I mean, I showed you the clip yesterday where he talked about how you had to get rid of them, right? The Taliban had to be removed.
But those are, in fact, the questions facing the United States, and I confess I have no easy answers to any of them. First, our immediate goal is to cut off the head of al-Qaeda, break up the network, leave them no safe haven. That means, to state the obvious, the removal of bin Laden, Mullah Omar, and the Taliban leadership.
So the obvious, in 2001, was the removal of the Taliban leadership.
I don't know how long it will be before the regime is toppled.
To topple the regime, to get rid of the Taliban regime that had to be destroyed, and now you've empowered them.
I wouldn't want to guess, but it seems to me the handwriting is on the wall, as they say. They've lost the support of their key sponsors, and they're essentially isolated.
Well, now you're a key sponsor, right? You've just given them $80 billion worth of weapons. So you're saying we had to get rid of their sponsors.
But some of those sponsors may need reminding that they've got to make a clear break with the past now and in the future.
Because we're going to take care of the Taliban 20 years when we dump $80 trillion of training and military equipment on them and whatever else, infrastructure and all the rest of it. So we're now their biggest sponsor.
And we should not hesitate to spell that out to those sponsors. After al-Qaeda and the Taliban fall, to use the phrase of the day, when we drain the swamp, as the president says.
President Bush said that.
The medium-term goal is to roll up all al-Qaeda cells around the world. Then, with the help of other nations and possibly the ultimate sanction of the United Nations, our hope is that we'll see a relatively stable government in Afghanistan.
No, one that fell and folded within minutes of your announcement the Americans were pulling out, right? And so think about the failure here.
One that does not harbor terrorists, is acceptable to the major players in the region, represents the ethnic makeup of the country, and provides the foundation for future reconstruction of that country.
So nation building, right? So this is a failure, JoJo. There's just, you can't say this isn't a failure.
We delivered justice to bin Laden on May 2nd, 2011.
So I'm not in agreement with that. What I saw there, what happened afterwards, and, you know, them lying about the situation or misleading people about the picture of them in the Situation Room. You know, like going back to this thing with dogs, just to understand how the media works. And so a few, like The Guardian and a few publications published articles about dogs being left behind. And so it was a story that a few mainstream media publications, some of them more obscure, some of them more like, National Enquirer, not that bad, but, stuff that's more exploitive journalism, talked about the dogs being left behind. And in that, they put that picture up of the dogs in the tarmac, right? So this picture here, right? They put this picture up. And now, you see this helicopter all shot up and all this stuff. I mean, this is a very dramatic picture. And to see these dogs that are left here, zip ties here or whatever, the bottles of water like left in the... And so when you look at this picture, you're like, wow, this is horrific. They left dogs, service dogs that are part of the military team on the tarmac. That's what you see when you look at this picture. But they used that picture even though it wasn't true, because it was this other woman, the Charlotte woman, who had brought these dogs to the airport, these pets, some of them are cats, to get them out, and then they weren't able to do so, and so they had to bring them back to wherever it was. So it wasn't like it was said, right? That was clickbait stuff from the news media, which happens all the time. And so the military said, well, let's capitalize on this and fact check this picture, right? So they come out and give this statement here and say, hey, we didn't do that. And it makes it sound like they didn't leave any dogs behind, which they did, because some of the dogs that she has, or there's this other guy that has service dogs, that they're left behind, right? So there are service dogs there. They're just not in these cages. But this message is deceptive. And then all these mainstream media publications, Pentagon debunks reports claiming U.S. abandoned dozens of military service dogs in Kabul. They didn't debunk it. They just said those weren't in the cages, right? So this is a deceptive headline, which Yahoo News often does. I called them on that like 2 weeks ago, something that wasn't accurate. But you're reading this headline, because then oftentimes I don't even read what's here. Like oftentimes it's just the headline. And so in a world of clickbait and deception, now many people are thinking, well, all these, various agencies here, this Kabul Small Animal Rescue, I mean, here they are, they have the fundraiser. They're like, well, this is a scam, right? And so they're getting money, but people are saying, wait, is this money actually, this is a lot of money they're getting. And, now the military said we didn't leave any animals behind. And this is how the BS works. This is why it's all lies. And I don't try to figure out who's telling the truth. Like, I give you my opinion, but I don't lose sleep over it because there's no way for me to do so. Not in a way that other people would find factually satisfying. I just, I have my intuitional, God-based, heartfulness meditation-based reaction of what I see, what I'm interpreting as I see it. And, I don't have all the information and all these things. It's just learning to use your heart to assess what's going on around you in a world full of BS, right? I mean, that's where we are right now. Let's get back to the BSer in charge here.
Over a decade ago, Al-Qaeda was decimated. I respectfully suggest you ask yourself this question.
So remember when that happened, when this group was decimated, as he says, and then it was the rise of ISIS under Obama. And so what happened there? Because now we have ISIS-K, right? He's saying that they had victory in Afghanistan, but you are, running the military back with your tail between your legs and running away from this new all-powerful enemy called ISIS-K in Afghanistan. So what is another explanation here, right? So again, this is just another reasonable explanation, and just calling, this is the show. I call this the show. All this stuff that we see, the mainstream media, sports, and then, the news, and then the, celebrity stuff and politics, all the things that when you turn on to the TV, and this is the official story, and they're all connected in one way or another, that the Americans get this, illusionary world presented on first the television and now on the internet as well. And so when we look on the internet, we look on the, and the television, this is the way that they're depicting reality. And I find plot holes in that, right? These are plot holes in regard to this story about Afghanistan and ISIS-K. And so when the U.S. was leaving Iraq under Obama, there was a deal made. So when the original Iraq War happened, the Iraqis have learned from Vietnam and from Afghanistan that you can't beat the Americans head on. They learned this also from Kuwait because, what happened to Saddam Hussein in Kuwait when he invaded Kuwait, that the American military is not to be messed with. Too much money, superior training, and logistics. And air support, which is a big thing. Who wins the battle of the skies? Because that's what happened in Libya, when there is, air support. Libyan Air Force was grounded, and the Americans that didn't invade themselves, but just gave air support to the, rebels, these insurgent groups that they put in, they controlled, many of them that weren't Libyan citizens because the Libyans were happy for the most part. And so when you have air support, it changes everything. If you control the skies, then the other army is completely vulnerable. And if you don't have any, any anti-aircraft weaponry or you don't have any air support yourself, you're screwed. You can't win, right? So that's going to come into play here. And so the Iraqis knew that they were going to lose to the Americans. So they just faded in. They took off their uniforms and they just resumed civilian lives. And, the Americans at first said, all right, look, they just walked into Baghdad, right? Remember the second Iraq War under Bush W. Bush and Dick Cheney. And so there was an elite military guard, the Republican Guard, who was the elite military of the Iraqis. And Americans didn't want to deal with them at first. They didn't want to make a deal like, Bush, like Trump made a deal with the Taliban because it was inevitable, right? They were the stronghold. And when the Americans left, that's who was going to take over the country. So they had to create something, of value to them. And it is, all the evidence points to them creating the organization now known as ISIS as an asset of the CIA and Americans. And ISIS is like a private organization based in Iraq that uses oil production and smuggling to pay for their operations. And it seems like some of the money must go back to the CIA. They're making as much as $3 million a day at oil fields. So this is an organization that's military, but using oil fields. Now, the CIA has a problem. See, here's the, if you search ISIS controls oil fields in Iraq, these are all the oil fields they show you. Some of these are very close to, Europe here. Here's Iraq over here. But there's the oil field that they most likely control is right here. There's a oil field here and a refinery here, right? And this is what the whole Syria war was about. The CIA has a problem is they don't want Congress oversight, congressional oversight to these seedy operations. And if they have to ask for American money for operations, then they're screwed. So they've engaged in drug dealing like they did in Vietnam and in Afghanistan, and they've been caught doing so. There's the Barry Seal, a movie with Tom Cruise, good movie to watch, and then there's the movie of that guy Webb, I forget his first name, but somebody will say they don't need a million comments, just maybe one person. Gary Webb, thank God. Gary Webb was a reporter who, I think it was Iran-Contra, which was a whole thing under Reagan, to the CIA and smuggling of drugs, and they destroyed Gary Webb, and he eventually died as a disgraced reporter for going up against the CIA. But my brother was in Vietnam, and he talked about guarding the poppy fields, and you can see images of American soldiers in Afghanistan guarding the poppy fields, and then the spike in opium production in Afghanistan 2009 and 10, and that's when the opioid crisis happened in America. And that's how the CIA funds their operations. And so to fund ISIS here, right, this oil field says here that they have this oil field here. Forbes, why Islamic State's ISIS oil revenue is plunging. This is an article from 2016. So, but it's well known that ISIS oil and how ISIS has influenced the oil trade. Islamic State of Iraq and Syria, also known as ISIS, is a militant T group that has seized control over large portions of the Middle East. Their roots date back to 2004 when they were part of Al-Qaeda in Iraq. They weren't. These were, that's deceptive, right? And so what they did was they took over these oil fields, multiple ones. If you see where these oil fields are here, this satellite, right? This field, it is in the middle of the frickin' desert, right? There's a little bit of infrastructure over here. But to get this oil to the refineries and all these things that are out there, they have to go through various long levels of wilderness all around here, right? A few roads in and out. And they can track guys because they have drones and they have all this surveillance equipment. Americans could just drone any oil tanker coming out of here, right? They could just destroy all of ISIS's infrastructure and their money supply by just droning anybody going down one of these roads. They don't even need to invade militarily. They could drop bombs on the oil field or whatever, and they could just make it so they couldn't get the oil out of here, right? And in these other places. Because America had air control, right? They had air power that was substantial. See, this is all, mountainous areas. They could easily have stopped ISIS by, getting rid of all their oil and things. And so the reason they didn't is because ISIS is more than likely some sort of CIA asset. I mean, if you're looking at this as a movie, that's what you would say. This is a plot hole, right? And so when Obama and Biden were in power and Hillary Clinton, ISIS was running amok. Remember the time when ISIS was, hey, ISIS, 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 right? Like, where did ISIS come from? And this is where they came from, and this is where they were getting their money. And they could easily have stopped them. And then remember when Trump took over, he said he had a plan to stop them. And I don't know what his plan was, but all he had to do was tell the CIA to stop, ordering ISIS to do things and using them as an asset. And so that seems to be what's happened here, right? Like, it makes the most logical sense in this, whatever fictional tale of the show that I talk about constantly. And so this clown, needing some help because he was about to leave Americans behind in Afghanistan for whatever reason, he's locked into this date of the 31st, his team is, because he's a puppet. And so they had to come up with some sort of, events that would gather support for him. And the ISIS-K bombing turned things around for him, right? But it seems completely unbelievable, like not legitimately believable.
If we'd been attacked on September 11, 2001, from Yemen instead of Afghanistan, would we have ever gone to war in Afghanistan?
You said that 5 times now. Stop making that point. Like, yeah, we know why we're there. We know what you said, the reason we're there, but those reasons haven't turned out. You said you got bin Laden in Pakistan, that Afghanistan wasn't, like he left Afghanistan shortly after Americans arrived. And he was in Pakistan, according to your story, for a number of years. We know that, right? We know that story. Yeah, all right, whatever. Stop saying this over and over again. Yeah, we're not going to Yemen either, right?
Even though the Taliban controlled Afghanistan in the year 2001, I believe the honest answer is no. That's because we had no vital interest in Afghanistan other than to prevent an attack on America's homeland and our friends.
Or the fact that it's the greatest place to grow opium, right? I've talked about the opium supply there. After Americans got to Afghanistan. So you can see here that in 2001, when Americans, big drop due to Taliban before U.S. invasion deposed them at the end of 2001. So the Taliban had finally gotten control of the opium markets, of the opium growth, right? And boom, this is where the opium production was. The Taliban said, no to opium for whatever reason, but probably good reasons, right? Because opium is brutal. And the Americans invaded right at that time, which seems highly sketchy. And then it goes up here and it spikes here. And this is when, right before the opium crisis here, and this is, just in Afghanistan, but eventually, like we know Johnson & Johnson from, if you've seen the Crime of the Century HBO documentary about OxyContin, that Johnson & Johnson, the drug company Johnson & Johnson, is growing opium, a souped-up poppy that produces more opium in Tasmania, near Australia. And so, but here you see all these spikes, and this is when the opioid crisis happened in America. And then this is a great chart here. Afghanistan is in light blue, and everyone else, all the other countries combined in terms of opium production, is in purple. Other countries, Vietnam produced a lot of opium as well, so that was part of the Vietnam War. That was, if you're going to say America's going in to colonize another country, well, it's going into Iraq for oil. And who has the oil now? ISIS, right? And, think about this. If America's always going to go to war, what did Vietnam have to offer? Well, opium. And American planes were used, military planes, to bring opium back to, there's a recent movie about a true story, Denzel Washington and I forget, it was American Gangster or something, and Russell Crowe. And he was getting this, this real life person in New York was getting opium shipped back from Vietnam in military planes. And so you see the rest of the world is doing about, half, a little bit more than half and Afghanistan in blue is doing half the opium production. And then 2001, Taliban shut down the production. Americans come in, and it spikes. And then up here, this is right before the opioid crisis. The opium production goes off the charts in Afghanistan, right? And so, this is got to be factored in because opium is worth a lot of money. It was a multi-billion-dollar, almost trillion-dollar business in America in the past, 10 years or so, and then globally. And it also keeps citizens controlled, right, the opioid crisis. And so this is a factor to what he's saying here.
Gone to war in Afghanistan? Even though the Taliban controlled Afghanistan in the year 2001? I believe the honest answer is no. That's because we had no vital interest in Afghanistan other than to prevent an attack on America's homeland and our friends.
I'm just thinking, who believes this? Like, who's sucking this up going, yeah, this guy talks truth. This guy makes a lot of sense, right? Like, who's believing this? What kind of, brain dead, hypnotized person you got to be to believe this guy? Like him saying that. Yeah, but none of this panned out the way you guys said it would. Taliban now are emboldened, empowered by you. You're their benefactor. You handed them, and, not just you, the whole American military-industrial complex just handed the Taliban, $80 billion worth of equipment. And then the infrastructure and all the rest of it. It's a failed operation, right?
And that's true today. We succeeded in what we set out to do in Afghanistan over a decade ago.
That's a tell right there. We didn't succeed. That's like, look at this.
Then we stayed for another decade. It was time to end this war.
It was time.
This is a new world. The terror threat has metastasized across the world, well beyond Afghanistan.
You know what? Like, this is, the fear that's used. The right wing for years used fear. Fox News is fear mongers, and there's a fear mongering group that controls most of the truth community. Alex Jones is a fear mongerer. Like most people who produce videos try to scare you. They use scary music and manipulative tactics because people there's like this fear porn, horror movies and things where people like to be upset and, your world is crumbling. Trump used fear, fear of all, the liberal agenda and the Hillary and the immigrants and immigration. Trump was a fear monger, and this guy's a fear monger, right? Like these things, I mean, your soul survives even after you die. Like death shouldn't be such a terrifying thing. But most of us aren't really at threat in terms of, what's going on in the world. I mean, I had COVID, right? And it sucked. And I wasn't in the best shape because of just, the stress I was going through post-divorce stuff and, being sick in India, just being worn out and my, low energy. And so it was a vulnerable time for me. But, my grandparents all lived into their 90s. And my one grandfather who didn't fought in 2 world wars and was a fireman and smoked, most of his life and died of lung cancer in his 80s. But he was, he had strong vital health, right? And so I got, COVID. It sucked. I mean, I'm still dealing with the after effects and whatever. I'm in better health now. But in terms of, being vulnerable, yeah, there's some people are vulnerable to diseases more so than others. And there are some people who are more at risk to, people from other countries who are mad at Americans or whatever it is. But this fear that's constantly used, right? Just stop with the fear already. Like, that's one of the ways that they control you, fear and temptation. Babaji, the second master of the heartfulness system, talked about this in this chapter in Reality at Dawn. It's a great book that you can read online, right? It's also available at the bookstore in the Sajmark bookstore. But he talked about fear and temptation as the tools used by religions to manipulate people. You scare them of something, you scare them of hell, and you offer them heaven, right? And that's what all these guys do. That's the scam they do. They offer you safety. This is protection money. Americans, there's people out there that want to do bad things to you, but we're going to protect you, And this is, how they're running the whole COVID thing as well, right? It's something where, creating fear and panic in the people, a problem, reaction, solution. And they're fear mongers, right? There's nothing lower than that. To scare people, create monsters and things for them to be scared of, boogeymen, and then offer them protection and take their money and their support and all these things. It's just the lowest level of leadership, right? This is what cults do.
We face threats from al-Shabaab in Somalia, al-Qaeda affiliates in Syria and the Arabian Peninsula, and ISIS attempting to create a caliphate in Syria and Iraq and establishing affiliates across Africa and Asia. The fundamental obligation of a president, in my opinion, is to defend and protect America.
So that means droning other people in other countries. That's their new plan over the horizon, to drone people, say that they have intelligence. They don't even know where all the Americans are at in Afghanistan. They didn't know what was going to happen when they left. They didn't know how strong the Taliban were, and we had a military presence there. All the stuff we have with the NSA and the surveillance state and the intelligence community all were a part of this thing in Iraq. And they had no idea what was going to happen with the Taliban, but they can pinpoint people in these countries, people who are aware of American spy capability and are hiding themselves away because of whatever, and these guys are able to pinpoint these bad actors and drone them without any sort of a trial, any sort of international oversight in foreign countries, sovereign countries. And America thinks they have the right to just go bomb any country they want and civilians there because their intelligence community that seems to suck it up and get it wrong all the time guarantee them they're taking out a bad guy and not kids. After he's already been responsible for droning kids, 6 of them in Afghanistan, according to the official story of this show.
Not against threats of 2001, but against the threats of 2021 and tomorrow. That is the guiding principle behind my decisions about Afghanistan. I simply do not believe that the safety and security of America is enhanced by continuing to deploy thousands of American troops and spending billions of dollars a year in Afghanistan.
See, he's talking like he was against these wars in the first place. I've already showed you him talking about 2001. There was the Katie Couric interview in 2008. There was his, the clips I showed you of his debate with Paul Ryan when he was running for, vice president with Biden in 2012. I mean, they talk about this over and over again, where they're in favor of these wars, and he voted for these wars, and he was, part of this. And now he's like, oh, I'm not in favor of this at all. Yeah, well, you were part of this whole debacle. You were a big part of it as a elder, a senior senator, for years, and then as vice president, and now as president. And so you're like, yeah, now like I'm fine tuning it, and we have a new plan. Well, we didn't give you enough pushback when you put out the first plan, right? Like we gave you carte blanche, and now it's we see what's happened now, and now you have another plan, and your plan involves droning civilians in other countries. No thanks.
But I also know that the threat from terrorism continues in its pernicious and evil nature. But it's changed.
Another fear-mongering piece of crap here.
Expand it to other countries. Our strategy has to change too. We will maintain the fight against terrorism in Afghanistan and other countries. We just don't need to fight a ground war to do it. We have what's called over-the-horizon capabilities.
Droning kids.
Which means we can strike terrorists and targets without American boots on the ground.
And women and children and families and civilians and maybe even, pets and dogs and whatever else, right?
or very few if needed. We've shown that capacity just in the last week.
Yeah, you droned 6 kids. And 3 of your allies, people who were working with the Americans, 9 people, you droned. And, there's that tongue thing he just did. Let's watch that again here.
The last week.
He's licked his lips. He licked his lips like a frickin' lizard. Let's watch that again. I'll blow this up when I go to edit it. But I'll slow this down, and here we go. Ready? Watch him lick his lips like a lizard.
We've shown that capacity just in the last week.
Look at that lizard MNFer right there. I was talking to my wife because the news was on. We had just finished watching something, and we were watching something on Amazon, and it went back to DirecTV where I had the news on, and Rachel Maddow was there, and I paused it because I didn't want to listen to it, and her face was in this. I just have this knack. It's probably my number one talent here, of just stopping. Like I just stop when these guys are in these compromised expressions, and it reveals so much of their inner condition. Like that's what I do in terms of, being trained as a counselor and an introvert, and especially doing the heartfulness meditation and working as a trainer, and being able to read people. They have their facade, they have their mask. Everyone has their brand, but being able to see beyond that, right? And, ultimately you want to be able to see people's souls. You want to get a sense of what they are as a soul because, beyond their ego and their grossness, there's the purity of the soul, even in evil people. Down buried deep, there is a soul. The soul isn't, the soul is always divine. The soul can't get contaminated. The soul doesn't change. But it's people's subtle bodies, the subtle spiritual energy, this is from the heartfulness meditation, is something that can evolve and change. And then there's the ego and the grossness that settles in the person's persona. But this is a reflection of, the negativity of his condition, that he's talking about this and he's licking his lips when we know that he droned 9 civilians and they haven't even addressed this at all, right? He's a droner of children.
We struck ISIS-K remotely, days after they murdered 13 of our service members and dozens of innocent Afghans.
And then he's doing it again, another tell. They drone kids. The official story is there was guys heading to the airport. The planner of the first, whatever it was droned the first day. And then the guy behind it, there was a car full of people. And if some of them had, explosive on them, and they droned them, and then the secondary explosion killed a bunch of civilians, so it isn't their fault. But this, he's lying, right? These are tells right here.
And to ISIS-K, we are not done with you yet.
Yeah. When did they? Why didn't they attack when Trump had to deal with the Taliban? If they were the sworn enemy of the Taliban, why didn't they attack that whole year, and then up to this point, when you guys were going to leave, and then America's getting out of the country, which is what everybody wants, and then they pull off this crap? It seems a little bit too convenient, right? It's a big plot hole in your story here, bro.
As Commander-in-Chief, I firmly believe the best path to guard our safety and our security lies in a tough, unforgiving, targeted, precise strategy that goes after terror where it is today, not where it was 2 decades ago. That's what's in our national interest. And here's a critical thing to understand.
This is where he's trying to be like he's some wise man, right?
The world is changing.
Wait, is it? It's changing. You mean the reset? What do you like? Yeah, we know it's changing. America is toppling, right? We're in free fall.
We're engaged in a serious competition with China. We're dealing with the challenges on multiple fronts with Russia. We're confronted with cyber attacks and nuclear proliferation.
He's going back and forth here. Look, he's let's just back it up a little bit here. But look at him as he goes back and forth
on
here.
multiple fronts with Russia. We're confronted with cyber attacks
Oh,
and nuclear proliferation.
oh, all right, they're straighten up there,
America's
JoJo.
competitive to meet these new challenges in the competition for the 21st century. And we can do both. Fight terrorism and take on new threats that are here now.
You know, this is all about fear, right? Like if you're living the way you're supposed to live, which we're not, and you're backed by God, then you should be less concerned about things like this. You know, death will come when it comes, right? You're going to have some miseries and tragedies. They can't be prevented. All this fake control.
And will continue to be here in the future. And there's nothing China or Russia would rather have, would want more in this competition in the United States to be bogged down another decade in Afghanistan.
Yeah, but I mean, we shouldn't have been there in the first place. This is all military-industrial complex BS. All right, I'm getting, my energy's fading here. I don't know if he takes any questions. I don't think he does. Let's wrap it up here at the end.
Not the past. To a future that's safer. To a future that's more secure.
There's no safety and security. You're going to die. You're going to have miseries. You're going to have difficulties. If you're connected to God and you're living your soul's path, then you feel good about your life, right? If you're not, if you're, disconnected from God, you're disconnected from your purpose here, your spiritual purpose here, and you're living a lie, then you're going to always be miserable. You're waiting for a correction that's going to come, right? You're waiting for, something to, knock you off of your wrong path. When you start deviating from your spiritual path, and this is what our country has done in our world and the economy, then eventually, you deviate from nature and something's going to knock you back towards where you're supposed to be going. Miseries and difficulties and obstacles will arise to say, hey, you're going in the wrong frickin' direction. Go back to where you started. I mean, this is what the heartfulness system, hopefully does for people, is to get you reconnected with your soul's path and get you, congruent with what God wants from you and what your soul wants from you. Get your ego in line with your soul and God's purpose for you, your divine purpose. Because souls come down to earth and get off track all the time. Even saints, higher developed souls. It's one of the problems with planet Earth. People get distracted, you get sucked in to the illusion, right? And so, if you're not on the path you're supposed to be on, then you're always worried, especially these liars and these controllers who want to control everything. The only way they can prevent the loss of power, because money and power and all these things, they flow through you, right? You have it and then you lose it. You have it, you need it, and then you don't need it anymore. And it's like a tool you pick up and you move to something else. But they don't want to let go of it, and that's one of the big problems. The ego doesn't want to give up its power and privileges.
To a future that honors those who served and all those who gave what President Lincoln called their last full measure of devotion. I give you my word with all of my heart. I believe this is the right decision.
You mean to end a mistake? Well, yeah, of course it was. But not, you're not getting away that easy, bro. Like, you're a part of this mess. You're, a central figure in this mess.
A wise decision and the best decision for America. Thank you. Thank you, and may God bless you all, and may God protect our troops.
You have the most superior military. Like I said this before, stop bringing God into this. God has zero to do with this. You didn't consult God before you did all this, stuff, all these lies, all this BS. You didn't connect to God. You didn't ask God's permission. You went ahead and did it. Don't try to ask God for protection and whatever now, right? Like, look at him, walk away in shame. You lizardy MNFer. Grab your mask. You've been like spitting on your mask now the whole time. And you go put it on. Put your mask on here. There you go. You got it right here. Going there. Kabowie. There you go. Put it on because there's going to be so many people there wearing masks. I wish they could just show you what happens here. But it's just, lying them enough or walk out that door in shame. You manipulative, fear-mongering piece of crap. All right, I had a long voiceover to do today. A beautiful day outside today. I got a lot of work done, and I still have more to do outside. And, a couple of my videos got demonetized. It was a whole nightmare because of excessive vulgarity. And so, some days it just feels better to be doing work outside. So this is a long video, so I am... I'll wrap this thing up tomorrow. Only spirituality will save this world. It's Paul Romano, definitely pointing from the Apocalaughs and the Ascension. Everyone have a blessed day and be grateful.